Okay, so good afternoon, students. Today I'll be taking class on quality control in clinical laboratory. Well, as you all know, this is a very important topic. So I am repeatedly taking this class because this topic is really important. So that's why this will be my third class. Like first, when you guys were there here in this institute, I had taken this class earlier. Then now, once I have given it in Google Classroom, and this is the third time that I'm revising this topic, and it's very important. That's why I'm repeatedly taking this class. Okay, I hope you all are well, and a very good afternoon. So, to begin with, what is quality control? Quality control is a process to periodically examine an analytical procedure using quality control samples or surrogate samples to verify if it is performing according to the pre-established performance. So it's a long sentence, but in simple words, what I'm trying to say here is that, for example, we have an instrument, okay, and it is measuring the glucose level. And it's very important for that instrument to make sure that that instrument is giving a very accurate result. So how do we know that that instrument is giving an accurate result is by performing a quality control test. So how do we do this quality control test is that we have certain samples, which is known as quality control samples or surrogate samples. So we run those samples, and accordingly from that sample, we try to determine if that particular machine is performing according to the pre-established performance. Okay? Now, the quality, that is degree of excellence, can be determined by two things, that is quality control and quality assessment. And together we actually get what is known as quality assurance. Okay, so when we report a medical result, what we are trying to give to the patient is we have to give the patient in such a way that there is quality assurance in that particular report. Okay, so quality assurance. So the purpose of quality assurance is the maintenance of overall quality of the patient's results. And there are various factors that affect the test results. So what are the factors that affect the test results? We have the pre-analytical factors, we have the analytical factors, and we have the post-analytical factors. Okay, I will be speaking in detail about all these factors in the subsequent slides. So see, this is the cycle, the quality assurance cycle. So we have the pre-analytical phase, the analytical phase, and the post-analytical phase. And in pre-analytical phase, there's some things like how we prepare the patient, okay, how the sample collection has to be done, or how the sample collection is being transported, or how we store the sample, okay. All this comes under pre-analytical phase. Then we also have something called as the analytical phase. That is what is actually done or what is actually required when we are actually analyzing the test. And to do that, we also have to make sure that the quality control testing has to be done. Okay, and then the next phase is the post-analytical test. In post-analytical test, what happens is, like, we have already done the analysis of the particular test. Now we have to report the test. Okay, so for example, when we are writing, like for example, the patient's blood sugar level was actually 76, let's say. But instead of 76, instead of the technicians writing the report as 76, for example, if the patient has written 176, then that becomes a post-analytical error. That becomes an error. So the clinicians, because of the mistake of the clerk, or because of the mistake of the technicians in writing or in reporting, the clinicians will diagnose the patient, will have a wrong diagnosis. So this cycle is very important. So that is pre-analytical, analytical, and post-analytical cycle. So what are the controls for pre-analytical variables? Pre-analytical variability is defined as errors which occurs when non-analytical factors change the concentration of analytes. So as the word suggests, pre-analytical means before the analysis. Okay, so what are the variables that affects these pre-analytical variables? So the test conducted. appropriate test should be requested and performed. Like for example, the test requested was for glucose, okay? But instead of testing a glucose test, by mistake you have run you have run a urea or a kidney function test, then it really affects, okay? So the test conducted is very important. And then number 2 is patient identification. So when we fill up the particulars, the filling up of particulars of the patient is very important. Like labeling of the specimen may be improper, or so bar coding, we have something called as the bar coding, and this bar coding is very important for correction. For example, by mistake we have labeled the patient. Like for example, many people have similar names. Like for example, a female might have a name like Christina, okay? But the difference is in their surnames. So let's say Christina Walang was one name, for example, and then the other patient's name was Christina, let's say Lingdo, okay? So the first name itself is Christina, okay? So we can get confused. For example, the sample number 1 was the patient's name was Christina Walang, and the sample number 2, the patient's name was Christina Lingdo, okay? So then, for example, if we switch by mistake, if we switch the samples, if we were just to write the name Christina only, then it becomes very difficult. So while we are writing the particulars of the patient, it's very important to have a proper name along with the surname, the age, then, the gender, everything. So this patient identification is very important. Now coming to turnaround time. Turnaround time should be always kept minimum. Turnaround time is, what is turnaround time? Turnaround time is from the time of collection of the sample to reporting the results. So this is known as turnaround time, and this turnaround time is very important and it should be kept minimum. Then we have laboratory logs. So whenever we are entering the patient's entry of the patients and then the test details, all this in the logbook, whenever the attendants and all are writing in this laboratory logs, it is very important to write the right information. Okay. Then we have something called as transcription error also. Like for example, when we are, this transcription error usually happens when entry is done manually. Okay. So that's why it's always preferable to use computerized this thing. Always better to use a computer, or so that this error of manual error is reduced. Then patient preparation is also very important. So for example, you want to test the fasting level of glucose, let's say. So we wanted to test the fasting level of glucose, but so for fasting level of glucose, to do the fasting level of glucose, we have to prepare the patient, right? We have to ask the patient to at least fast for 8 to 12 hours. But if the patient has not, prepared himself, and if the patient has just come and just given his or her blood sample like that, then it becomes very difficult. So that's why the test results will not reflect whatever we want. For example, fasting and postprandial, the test results are very different. So that's why it's very important to tell a patient whatever, for example, if it is a fasting glucose level that we have to measure, then we have to instruct the patient how to prepare, or how many time or how long to fast. Okay. Now specimen collection. Specimen collection is also very important. I think you all remember going to the collection center and looking at the different vials, right? So here the specimen collection is very important. Like for example, the blood glucose level, the blood sample for the glucose, we are supposed to collect it in the Cray container, where that the Cray container contains sodium fluoride, right? So sodium fluoride, what's the action of that? It inhibits glycolysis, right? And also it acts as an anticoagulant. So now, for example, if you were to collect it in a different container, then it will hamper the process. So that's why collecting the sample in the right container is also very important. Then specimen transport. So for example, some specimen, in order to maintain the viability, we have to transport it in a cold chain. Like for example, coronavirus. After taking the sample like the nasal swab or the throat swab from the patient, we put it in a viral transport medium, and after that we transport it in a cold chain. So to maintain that cold chain is very important. So if we are not transporting the specimen in the required transport conditions, then the viability of that virus, or the virus may die, all these things can happen. So that's why specimen transport is also very critical for some tests. Then coming to specimen separation and aliquoting. So for this also it's very important. We have to centrifuge certain samples in a certain speed, and also where to store these particular samples is also very important. And also we always have to keep in mind that there is variation from person to person. Like I said before also, for example, let's give an example of creatinine. The creatinine value in female and male are very different, okay? So like the creatinine value in female is a little more lesser than as compared to in males, right? So you have to keep in mind that the sample can vary from person to person. So you always keep in mind that there is personal variation in the samples. Now coming to analytical factors. What are the variables that affects the analytical assessment? So reagent stability, integrity, and efficiency. So before doing the test, we have to make sure that the reagent is stable, and then that it's not expired, okay? And then we have stored the reagent in a proper temperature, in the proper required temperature. Then also the next is equipment reliability. For example, if the equipment that we have used is properly calibrated or not, right? And then if is it meeting the demand, is it meeting our technical needs, okay? Then also the specificity and sensitivity of the selected test. Like for example, what is sensitivity? Sensitivity is the ability of a test to correctly identify those with the disease. That is, in other words, it detects the true positive test, okay, the true positive. So for example, you're doing, for example, let's say coronavirus, you're doing a test for coronavirus. So sensitivity, when we talk about, okay, that particular test is sensitive. When we talk about the word sensitivity, that means the ability of that particular test to say that it is actually positive. For example, the patient was positive, then when you are reporting the patient as positive, the ability of that particular instrument to give the report as positive is true. So this sensitivity reflects the true positive rate of the test. Now coming to specificity. Specificity is the ability of the test to correctly identify those without the disease. That is the true negative. So for example, now I'll take the example of coronavirus only. For example, we have done a coronavirus from a particular test, let's say RT-PCR, okay, or a TrueNet machine you have taken, and then you want to say that particular testing was very specific, okay. So that, for example, a patient's test was negative, and so specificity means the ability of the test to correctly identify that patient's test was actually negative, okay. So specificity in other simple words means true negative, and sensitivity in other simple words means true positive. Now procedural reliability is also very important. For example, that's why the efficiency of that particular person who is performing the test is also very important. That's why standard operating procedures have to be there in front of the machines. Why? Because if you miss one step also, something can go wrong while in reporting the test results. That's why these SOPs are very important. Then documentation is very important. Like I said, here even in analytical tests, the documentation is very important. So we have to write the plans, the procedures, the instructions, how to be done, what is done, what is the temperature maintained, and everything. So while doing the analysis itself, in what temperature this particular test was maintained. So all these things, documentation is very important. And then while doing for analytical variables, quality control testing is very important. So for quality control testing, we have to make sure that instruments are also properly calibrated internally. So what we do, what is calibration? So calibration is the process of evaluating and adjusting the precision and accuracy of measurement equipments. So what is the actual advantage of calibration is that the proper calibration of an instrument allows us to have a safe working environment and to produce a valid data. Okay, so for example, let's take an example of a weighing machine. Okay, so for example, your actual weight was 50 kgs, okay, but then if your weighing machine was not properly calibrated, then it could give, like, for example, 60 kg, but that's not your actual weight, right? So you have to calibrate the machine in such a way that it's actually giving a valid data. Okay, so for example, if you're 50 kg, once you calibrate it properly, the particular machine is also supposed, the weighing machine is also supposed to give that reading as 50. Okay, so that's something that's known as proper calibration. And also proficiency of personnel is very important. Like I said, for example, if the patient or if whoever is doing, the technicians or the doctors or anyone, whoever is performing the test is not aware of the test, or so, if that particular person is not aware of the test or is ignorant, then it will affect the test results. So that's why proficiency of the personnel is also very important. So coming to calibration again, so calibration function is the relationship between the instrument signal and the concentration of the analyte, or it is a set of operations that establish the relationship between values of quantities indicated by the instrument and the corresponding values realized by the measurement standards. Calibration function may be linear or graphical. So don't get confused with all this. What I will ask you to remember is that we do calibration. Why? Why do we do? So that it can give that particular instrument can give a valid data. Like remember the example that I gave you, that is the weighing machine. Okay. Now coming to something called as accuracy. So when we calibrate the machine, we want to make sure that the particular machine is, adjusting to the precision and accuracy of the measurement equipments. Okay, so what is accuracy? Accuracy is the closeness of the agreement between the result of a measurement and a true concentration of the analyte. Okay, so look at this. For example, that particular concentration of a particular test was supposed to be, let's say we are expecting it to be 72. Okay, and when that particular test, on doing the test, it comes to around 70, then we know that it is accurate. It's very close to the true value of that particular analyte. Okay, so this is known as accuracy. Bullseye, hitting the bullseye is known as accuracy. The closeness of the agreement between the result of the measurement and the true concentration of the analyte. Now, what is precision? Precision means, in other words, it is known as repeatability. Okay, so when we are running that particular test over and over again, it always gives the same results. Okay, so let's take the example of this. Like, for example, we are performing the test. For example, let's just take glucose only, and then every time it's giving the same value. So the repeatability of that particular test. So that is known as precision. So what is reliability? So the ability to maintain both the precision and the accuracy is known as reliability. So if an instrument or if a test has the ability to have both the precision as well as accuracy, precision means very close to the true value of the concentration of the analyte, and accuracy and precision means on repeated testing, it always gives the same result. So if that particular test has the ability to do both, that is precision and accuracy, then we can say that that particular test or that particular machine is reliable, or this is known as reliability. Precision and accuracy together is known as reliability. So there are various statistical control of analytical methods. Okay, so we have to, in order to do all these tests, how do we actually know how do we actually assess? So we assess by using statistical methods. Okay, so something that you have to remember is you have to remember the mean. Okay, you have to also remember the standard deviations. Okay, so in quality control procedures, there are two types of quality control procedures. We have the internal quality assessment and we have the external quality assessment. For external quality assessment is also known as proficiency testing. So what are the quality control products? We have different quality control products. Like, for example, in order to run the quality control, we use different samples, right? So this quality control product is it's a product which is patient-like material and made from human serum, urine, or spinal fluids. and then they can be in liquid form or in freeze-dried form, and it is composed of one or more constituents of the non-concentration. So the quality control, when we run a quality control, we make these quality control products. Okay, so these quality control products are very similar, or very, it mimics the sample of a patient, or it mimics the sample of a normal patient if it is a normal quality control or a product, or if it is a high quality control product, like for example if it is giving a high level, then it should mimic a disease patient sample. Okay, so here quality, this particular graph is a comparison of quality control results to specific statistical analysis. So what we have in quality control is something, we have something called as a normal control, and we have something called as abnormal control. Okay, so in normal control, this quality control product will give the normal values. It will have a normal range, okay, of that particular analyte. And in abnormal control, they will have an abnormal range. It can be either high abnormal or it can be either low abnormal. Okay, so this table, it shows list of assessment it shows a list of assessments done over a period of 7 days. Okay, and then we have the normal control and we have the abnormal control. So as we can see here, from November 1 to November 7, the value for normal is all within the normal limits, because the range is from 3.7 to 4.3. So as we can see here, it's all within the normal range, right? And as for level 2, there's abnormal control. From here also we can see that the range is between 6.7 to 7.3. And here also we can see that from 1st of November to 6th of November, it was within the range, but in 7th of November, we can see that it is beyond the range, that is from beyond 7.3. So what do we say this type of control? We can say that this particular sample was out of control. Okay. So how do we calculate the mean? It is the sum of each value in the data set divided by the number of values in the data set. So this is the formula for calculating the mean. And how do we calculate the standard deviation? Standard deviation in simple words means deviating from the mean. Okay, so standard deviation, how do we calculate? It is the sum of the square of differences between the individual QC values and the mean divided by the number of the values in the data set minus 1. So if we were to refer in the previous slides, then when we calculate the mean, after calculating the mean, we will try to calculate the standard deviations. And when we calculate the standard deviation, plus minus 1s means deviating for up to 1s standard deviation. And plus and minus 2st means it can either deviate more than or less than 2st deviation. And when we say plus or minus 3st, it can either deviate, or it can be either more than or less than 3st. So this is Lewis-Jennings chart. Okay, this Lewis-Jennings chart is very important. So how to make this Lewis-Jennings chart? Like, let's say in the middle we have 4.1. Okay, so this is the level of potassium that we are doing. Okay, so how do we determine this mean? You all must be wondering, how did we determine this mean? No, so in order to determine this mean, at least we need to we need to do at least 20 samples to determine this mean first. So after collecting 20 samples first, we calculate the mean from the given formula that I have talked about in the previous slides. After calculating the mean, then we calculate the standard deviations. Okay, so standard deviation plus 1, then minus 1s, then standard deviation plus 2, minus 2s, standard deviation plus 3, and minus 3s. So that's how you calculate the mean and the standard deviation. And this particular graph that you are plotting is known as Lewis-Jennings chart. Okay. So there are two errors that happens when we perform this test. There's something known as systematic error, and there is something known as random error. Okay. So what is systematic error? This I have not taken in the previous slides, so this is very important. Please listen carefully. So systematic error is evident by a change in the mean of the control value. Okay, the change in the mean may be gradual or demonstrated as trend in control value, or it may be abrupt or demonstrated as shift in the control value. So basically, in simple words, systematic error means if it is deviating from the mean value, any value, if at all it is deviating from the mean value, then we consider that as systematic error. Okay, so this type of systematic error can be in two ways. It can be in trend. Okay, it means like slowly that error is happening and it is becoming a trend. Okay, it is gradual. There are certain points here, like for example, deterioration of instruments, and then gradual because of gradual accumulation of debris, okay, or gradual accumulation of debris on electrolyte surface, aging of reagents, gradual deterioration of control materials, gradual deterioration of incubation chamber, gradual deterioration of light filter integrity, gradual deterioration of calibrations. So these are the factors that cause the trend in the systematic error. Okay, now we have another thing known as a shift. Shift means a sudden shift, like for example, if it just abruptly changes, for example, the particular mean, the particular value, it abruptly changes away from the mean. Okay, for example, you were having it was, for example, the value was coming just in between the mean value, then abruptly all of a sudden it went up to beyond more than plus 2s, then that is called as a shift, an abrupt change. Okay, so in systematic error there are two types of changes that happens. One is trend and one is shift. So this is an example here. See, in the first graph, as you can see the trend, as you can see, as we draw the line there, it is gradually increasing. The change is there. So from the 5th day, after the 4th day, the 5th day, the change was there. See, from the 5th day, it has increased, and after that, from the 5th day, it has gradually increased only. It has not decreased only at all, right? It has increased only. So there is an increasing trend, a change in the trend, right? So the trend is an increasing, the values are getting increasing day by day. So that is a trend, right? Now coming to, let's say, the shift. The shift here is, for example, on the 5th day, on the 4th day it was decreased, on the 5th day it was increased, but on the 6th day, as you can see, there was a sudden increase from, it was within the mean on the 5th day, but from the 6th day, it suddenly increased to more than plus 2s. Okay, so that means it is an abrupt change. It was a shift. So this type of example is known as shift. Okay, so the two changes that happens in systematic error is one is trend and one is shift. Now we also have something called as random error. So what is random error? So technically random error is any deviation away from an expected result. For QC result, a positive or a negative deviation away from the calculated mean is defined as the random error. There is acceptable random error, which is like, for example, we are like if it is within the acceptable range, then we call it as acceptable random error. And if it is beyond the unacceptable range, then we call it as expected random error. Okay, so in order to read the Lewis-Jennings chart, we have different rules. Okay, so what are the rules that we have to know in order to read the Lewis-Jennings chart? So as we have repeatedly been telling you, we use the rules Westcott rule. Okay, so we have 1-2s rule, 1-3s rule, 2-2s rule, R4s rule, 4-1s rule, and 10x rule. Okay, so these are rules, and these are known as Westcott rules. Okay, and these rules will help us to read the Lewis-Jennings chart, and this help us to determine if it is a random error or a systematic error. Okay. So 1-2s rule. 1-2s rule is, for example, you have run the control level, and if that control level is going beyond the 2s, okay, going beyond 2s, then we call it as a 1-2s rule. Okay, so this is a systematic error, okay, because it is deviating from the mean. Okay, so it is a systematic error, and just to make sure that this is still an acceptable rule, but it is a warning sign. Okay, so when a test control test has report has come as 1-2s rule, if it is if it is coming beyond plus 2s, then we can still accept this particular run, but we have to be careful that it is a warning sign. If anything can happen the next time, then we have to be looking at it, like we have to see if the QC material is okay, if the temperature is maintained, if the calibration is done. All those things we have to cross-check. But remember, it is still an acceptable rule, and it is a warning rule actually, and it is a systematic error. Then second is 1-3S rule. So 1-3S rule, as the name suggests, it is going beyond 3S. Okay, so it's going beyond 3S from the standard deviation. So this 1-3S rule, it is a reject rule. Okay, if the particular control test is going beyond 1-3S, means you have to reject this particular test. Okay, so reject the run when a single control measurement exceeds for more than, if it is exceeding more than 3S plus 3S, or if it is exceeding more than minus 3S, this type of run we have to reject. Okay, so this is 1-3S rule, and this is an example of random error. Okay, now we also have 2-2S rule. So here the two, what does it mean by 2-2S? 2-2S means the consecutive, for example, we have run two controls, and both the times the control was more than 2S. Okay, so for always in both the consecutive test control that we measured, it was more than 2S. So this is known as 2-2S rule. So this is also a reject rule. Okay, and then this reflects a systematic error. Now we have something called as R4S rule. This R4S rule, it is it is also, as the name suggests, R stands for reject. So when we have something called as something like this, it is known as R4S rule. So in R4S rule, for example, in one control, it has exceeded more than plus 2S. Okay, and then in the next control also again it has exceeded minus 2S. Okay, so in one control, for example, if we're referring to this graph, then in one control it was minus 2S, and in the other control it was more than plus 2S. That means that the difference is coming to more than 4. Okay, so that's why this is a rejection rule. It is known as R4S rule, and it's a rejection rule, and it's also a systematic error. Now we also have something called as the 10x rule. Okay, so it's a reject rule that run when 10 consecutive control measurements fall on one side. For example, see, if you can see in this slide, all the controls are, 10 times we have run the control test, and then it's only in one side. It's going in the positive side, right? It is more than 1 ST, and then it's going from the mean, and it's only in one side. All the 10 runs that we have run is going in one side. So this is also a rejection rule, and it's also a systematic error. So those were the Westcott rules. So please try to remember Westcott rule. It's very important. So the chart that we call is this, the chart that we have plotted is Lewis-Jennings chart. Please remember that. And then we have two types of error. Okay, we have random error and we have systematic error. Okay, please remember that also. And then we have different rules to either determine if it was a systematic error or random error. And if it was a rejection, if we have to reject that run, or if we have to, it is an alarm, if it is an alert alarm. Okay, so all these rules would determine if we have to reject that particular run, or if we have to, be careful about it. So there are different rules. So please don't forget 1-2S, 1-3S, 2-2S, R4S, 10x rule. Okay. Now the previous slides that I had explained were something to do with internal quality control, but we also do something called as external quality assessment. Okay. So we also want to make sure that whatever test that our laboratory is doing is also meets, whatever testing we're doing is also similar to the other laboratories, the other labs that have been, releasing the reports. We also want to make sure that it is similar to the other laboratories. So what we do is we do something called as external quality assessment. Okay, so here our NIGRIMS lab is collaborating with CMC Vellore for external quality assurance scheme, and then that's how we are performing our quality control. So this is assignment. I think I've already given in my Google Classroom assignment. I'm sure you all have done it. So I'll not be doing this assignment with you all. I'll be checking when you guys come. Yeah. So So that's about it. Thank you very much.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you,
Thank you,
ma'am.
ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.